The morning of June 6, 1944, started like any other combat mission for Lieutenant Thomas Fraser. At 9:47 a.m., he pushed forward on the throttle of his P-51B Mustang and lifted into the English sky. His destination was France, where he would join the protective air cover over Allied forces hitting the Normandy beaches. Fraser belonged to the 334th Fighter Squadron, 4th Fighter Group. The Mustang beneath him, nicknamed Jerry, wore olive drab camouflage and carried 4.50 caliber machine guns. Its Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine generated 1,490 horsepower, making it America's premier long-range fighter. Fraser was a skilled pilot who understood his aircraft intimately. What Fraser couldn't predict was that his plane would soon be grounded in German-occupied territory, and within days, a Luftwaffe test pilot would be taking it through its paces over Germany. That evaluation would fundamentally alter how the Luftwaffe understood the aircraft decimating them across European skies. The trouble began at 12,000 feet above northern France. Fraser's squadron was covering a bomber group when his engine started behaving erratically. Oil pressure began falling while coolant temperature climbed. The Merlin engine that made the Mustang so formidable was simultaneously its Achilles heel. It used liquid cooling with radiators mounted under the fuselage and coolant lines threading through the airframe. A single small leak, one tiny puncture from flak or bullets, and the engine would overheat within minutes. Fraser had limited options. He radioed his flight leader, broke from formation, and descended. He needed to locate a landing spot before his engine seized completely. The landscape below showed a patchwork of fields and hedgerows. German territory. Enemy soldiers everywhere. But Fraser had run out of choices. The engine was failing. He identified a field that appeared sufficiently flat. Landing gear down, flaps extended. He brought the Mustang down as smoothly as circumstances allowed, touching down on uneven grass before rolling to a halt. The aircraft remained intact. No airframe damage, no bent propeller, no compromised landing gear, just an engine that wouldn't run. Fraser climbed from the cockpit, surveyed the empty French countryside, and started walking, attempting to evade capture. His freedom lasted mere hours. German troops found him quickly. The Mustang sat in that field less than 6 hours before a German recovery team arrived. They operated a well-organized system managed by specialized salvage units called Bergungsbataillon. Their mission was recovering crashed Allied aircraft before roaming American and British fighters could strafe them into useless scrap. The team moved efficiently. They drained remaining fuel, disconnected the battery, covered the cockpit, and posted guards. By nightfall, a heavy truck with a flatbed trailer backed up to the Mustang. By the following morning, Fraser's P-51B was aboard a train heading east toward Germany, destination Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's primary aircraft testing facility. Rechlin sat approximately 100 kilometers northwest of Berlin in a remote section of Mecklenburg. The facility had served as Germany's main aircraft test center since 1936. Every new German aircraft design passed through Rechlin. Every captured enemy aircraft that could fly ended up there too. The place featured multiple runways, hangars filled with experimental aircraft, workshops staffed by expert mechanics, and a group of test pilots who flew everything from gliders to the newest jet fighters. One of those test pilots was Hans-Werner Lerche, 30 years old, trained as an engineer and among Germany's finest pilots. Lerche had learned gliding as a teenager, earned his powered aircraft license in the 1930s, and joined the Luftwaffe at war's outbreak. But Lerche never flew combat missions. His abilities were too valuable. He was assigned to Rechlin as a test pilot, tasked with flying anything they gave him and writing detailed performance reports. By June 1944, Lerche had flown over 120 different aircraft types. German designs, Italian designs, captured Soviet fighters, captured British bombers. He had test-flown Spitfires, Lancasters, P-38s, P-47s. He could take off in an unfamiliar aircraft without manuals, without checklists, just his engineering knowledge and pilot instincts guiding him. Most remarkably, he had never crashed a single airplane throughout his entire career. That record was extraordinary considering he was flying enemy aircraft with no instruction books, no training, just educated guesses about control locations and system operations. When Fraser's Mustang arrived at Rechlin on June 8th, Lerche was told to have it flight-ready within 2 days. That time frame was unusually compressed. Normally captured aircraft sat for weeks, while mechanics examined every system, checked for sabotage, repaired damage, and figured out how everything functioned. But the Luftwaffe desperately needed information about the P-51. The Mustang had appeared over Germany in significant numbers only 6 months earlier, in December 1943. Before that, American bombers had been escorted by P-38s and P-47s, capable aircraft, but with limited range. The bombers had been vulnerable deep inside Germany. Luftwaffe fighters had been destroying them by the dozens. Then, the Mustang arrived. Suddenly, American bombers had an escort that could accompany them anywhere. Berlin, Munich, even targets deep in Poland. The Mustang could fly over 900 miles on internal fuel, 1,500 miles with drop tanks. It was fast, 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. It could climb to 42,000 feet. It could turn with a Messerschmitt 109, could dive away from a Focke-Wulf 190, and it carried 4.50 caliber machine guns that could tear a German fighter apart. In 6 months, the Mustang had transformed the air war over Europe. German pilots, who had dominated the skies in 1943, were suddenly defensive. Kill ratios that had favored the Luftwaffe were reversing. And nobody in German command fully grasped why this one American fighter was so much better than everything else the Allies flew. That's why Lerche was given only 2 days to prepare Fraser's Mustang. They needed answers. The mechanics at Rechlin worked continuously. They removed the engine, found the coolant leak that had forced Fraser down, and repaired it. They inspected every system, every control surface, every fuel line, every hydraulic connection. They painted the undersides and tail bright yellow, the standard color for captured aircraft at Rechlin, so German anti-aircraft gunners wouldn't shoot it down. They painted large black crosses on the wings and fuselage. They gave it a German designation code, T9 plus HK. They filled the tanks with high-octane American fuel from captured stocks. By the morning of June 10th, the Mustang was ready. Lerche walked out to the aircraft at 0800 hours. He had reviewed every piece of information the Luftwaffe had on the P-51, intelligence reports from pilots who had fought against them, technical drawings captured from downed aircraft, performance estimates based on combat observations. But all of that was second-hand information. Lerche was about to get first-hand data. He was about to discover if the P-51 Mustang was really as capable as the Americans claimed, or if it was just another overrated fighter that looked better on paper than in the air. The walk-around inspection took 20 minutes. The airframe looked well constructed, smooth skin, flush rivets, clean lines. The wings were thin, much thinner than a Messerschmitt 109 or a Focke-Wulf 190. Lerche recognized the laminar flow airfoil design, lower drag at high speeds, intelligent engineering. The cockpit was spacious compared to German fighters. The canopy provided good visibility, though not as excellent as the later bubble canopy models he had seen in intelligence photographs. The controls appeared straightforward. Stick, rudder pedals, throttle, mixture control, propeller pitch. The instrument panel was laid out logically, though everything was in English and used American units. Airspeed in miles per hour instead of kilometers per hour. Altitude in feet instead of meters. Lerche climbed into the cockpit. The seat fit comfortably. The stick fell naturally to hand. He checked the control surfaces. Ailerons moved smoothly. Elevator responded correctly. Rudder had good travel. He located the fuel selector, the gear lever, the flap control. He found the gun switches and made certain they were off. The last thing he needed was to accidentally fire 4.50 caliber machine guns on the ground at Rechlin. He checked the engine instruments. Oil pressure gauge, oil temperature gauge, coolant temperature gauge, manifold pressure, tachometer. Everything American pilots needed to keep the Merlin engine alive. Lerche knew the Merlin was a high-performance engine, but it was also sensitive. Too much throttle too fast, and it would stumble. Too lean on the mixture, and it would overheat. German engines were more forgiving. The Daimler-Benz 605 in the Bf 109 could take abuse. The BMW 801 in the FW 190 was practically indestructible. But the Merlin was a thoroughbred, and thoroughbreds needed careful handling. At 0842, Lerche signaled the ground crew. They pulled the wheel chocks. Lerche engaged the starter. The Merlin turned over, caught, settled into a rough idle. He let it warm up, watching the oil temperature climb slowly. The engine sounded different from German engines, higher pitched, smoother. When the temperatures reached the normal range, Lerche tested the magnetos. Both checked good. He advanced the throttle slightly, felt the aircraft strain against the brakes. He released the brakes and began taxiing. The Mustang's tail wheel wasn't steerable like some German aircraft. You had to use differential braking and rudder to control direction on the ground. Lerche had experience with that from flying captured British aircraft. He taxied to the runway, ran through a final check, and looked down the long concrete strip. No wind, clear sky, perfect conditions for a test flight. He advanced the throttle smoothly, keeping his feet on the rudder pedals to hold the nose straight. The Merlin responded instantly. The Mustang accelerated quickly, faster than a Bf 109, faster than most German fighters Lerche had flown. The tail came up at 40 miles per hour. At 90 miles per hour, the aircraft lifted off smoothly. Gear up. The Mustang climbed away from Rechlin at a steep angle, the Merlin pulling strong at full power. Lerche leveled off at 5,000 feet and began his evaluation. The first thing that struck him was how light the controls were. The stick required almost no force to move. A tiny input produced an immediate response. The ailerons were incredibly effective. Lerche rolled the Mustang to the left, then to the right. The aircraft snapped through the rolls faster than any fighter he had ever flown. In a Bf 109, you had to muscle the stick to get a fast roll rate. In the FW 190, the controls got heavy at high speed. But the Mustang rolled effortlessly, almost too easily. Lerche had to be careful not to over-control. He checked the rudder. Responsive, but not overly sensitive. The elevator was light, but effective. The Mustang was stable in pitch, didn't try to nose over or climb on its own. He tried a loop. The aircraft pulled through cleanly. No tendency to stall. No buffeting. Just smooth acceleration through the maneuver. He tried a barrel roll. Perfect. He tried a climbing turn, pulling 4 G-forces. The Mustang stayed smooth. No shaking, no warning signs of a stall. Lerche pushed the throttle to full power and accelerated in level flight. 160 miles per hour, 200, 250, 300. The Mustang was still accelerating. At 320 miles per hour, he leveled off and noted the Merlin's manifold pressure and RPM. The engine was running smooth, temperatures normal. He had more power available if he needed it. German intelligence had estimated the Mustang's top speed at 410 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. Lerche wanted to test that himself. He climbed to 23,000 feet, leveled off, and pushed the throttle to maximum continuous power. The Mustang accelerated. 350 miles per hour, 380, 400, 410, 416 miles per hour at 23,000 feet. German estimates had been close, but slightly low. The Mustang was even faster than intelligence thought. Lerche reduced power and tried different configurations. Flaps down, gear down, simulating a landing approach. The Mustang slowed smoothly. No bad habits. Gear up, flaps up, back to high-speed flight. He tested the stall characteristics. Clean configuration first. Power off, nose up, reducing speed gradually. The Mustang gave plenty of warning before the stall. The controls got mushy, the aircraft started to buffet, and then the nose dropped gently. No wing drop, no snap roll, just a docile stall that was easy to recover. He tried it with landing configuration. Gear down, flaps down, power off. Same result. Good warning, gentle brake, easy recovery. He tried it with power on, simulating a combat turn. At full throttle. The Mustang would stall even in a sharp turn if you pulled too hard, but it gave clear warning through stick force and buffet. Lerche noted that the P-51 was actually easier to fly near the stall than most German fighters. The Bf-109 would snap into a spin if you stalled it in a turn. The FW-190 would drop a wing violently. The Mustang just mushed, gave you time to recognize the problem, and recovered smoothly when you relaxed the back pressure. That was important in combat. A fighter that could be flown aggressively without killing the pilot was a deadly weapon. Lerche spent an hour putting the Mustang through every maneuver he could think of. Vertical climbs, split-S maneuvers, chandelles, Immelmann turns, scissors maneuvers. The aircraft responded instantly to every input. It never did anything unexpected. It never tried to kill him. When he landed back at Rechlin at 10:15, the ground crew was waiting. They wanted to know what he thought. Lerche shut down the Merlin, climbed out of the cockpit, and spoke 5 words that would appear in his official report the next day. It is a truly exceptional aircraft. Over the next 2 days, Lerche flew Fraser's Mustang 4 more times. He tested high-altitude performance, reaching 36,000 feet. He tested dive performance, pushing past 450 miles per hour in a steep dive. He tested fuel consumption, endurance, engine handling, control response at different speeds and altitudes. He compared the Mustang's performance to the latest German fighters, the Bf-109G10 and the FW-190D9. His conclusion was clear. Only those 2 German aircraft could match the Mustang in combat, and even they weren't clearly superior. The Mustang was fast at all altitudes, climbed well, turned tightly, dove like a rocket, and had enough fuel to stay in a fight for hours. Lerche also noted the weaknesses. The engine was sensitive to rough handling. The fuel system caused stability problems. If the internal fuselage tank was filled to certain levels, the aircraft would become unstable at full throttle if pulled into too sharp a turn. But these were minor issues compared to the overall performance. Lerche's report was typed up, classified, and distributed to Luftwaffe Command. 1 copy went to fighter units defending Germany. The message was clear. The P-51 Mustang was the best Allied fighter in the sky. Don't underestimate it. Don't assume your Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf was automatically superior. The Mustang could beat you in a turning fight, could outrun you in level flight, and could dive away from you if things got bad. The only advantages German fighters had were armament and experienced pilots. German 20mm and 30mm cannons hit harder than American .50 caliber machine guns. But by mid-1944, experienced German pilots were getting killed faster than they could be replaced. The Americans weren't the only ones who noticed something unusual. German fighter pilots started receiving information about the Mustang's capabilities, information that contradicted what they had been told before. At JG-1, a fighter wing defending northern Germany, pilots gathered in a briefing room to watch a demonstration. Outside on the airfield, several captured Allied aircraft had landed. P-38s, P-47s, a Spitfire, and a Mustang with German markings. The unit touring these airfields was called the Wanderzirkus Rosarius, the Rosarius Traveling Circus, named after Hauptmann Theodor Rosarius, who commanded the second staff of the Versuchsverband Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, the experimental unit of the Luftwaffe High Command. Rosarius's job was to familiarize German pilots with Allied aircraft, so they would understand their opponent's strengths and weaknesses. The briefing officer stood in front of the room and spoke carefully. You have been told that the Bf-109 and the FW-190 are superior to American fighters. In some respects, this is true, but the P-51 Mustang is different. You will see it demonstrated today. Pay attention to its roll rate, its acceleration, its turning performance. It is faster than you expect. It can turn tighter than you have been taught, and it has the range to follow you home if you try to disengage. Some of the pilots shifted uncomfortably. They had been in combat against Mustangs. They knew what the briefing officer was saying was true, but officially admitting it was different. After the briefing, the pilots walked out to the flight line. The Mustang with T9 markings was parked next to a Bf-109 and a Focke-Wulf 190. German pilots climbed into the cockpits, examined the controls, looked at the gun sight, felt the stick response. Then the demonstration flight began. 2 German pilots took off in the Bf-109 and the FW-190. A third pilot, an experienced test pilot from Rosarius's unit, took off in the Mustang. The 3 aircraft climbed to 10,000 feet, circled the airfield, and began a simulated dogfight. The pilots on the ground watched carefully. They saw the Mustang stay with the Bf-109 through hard turns. They saw it roll faster than the FW-190. They saw it accelerate away from both German fighters in level flight. They saw it climb at the same rate, dive faster, and maneuver with confidence. When the 3 aircraft landed, the German pilots who had been watching were quiet. That demonstration summarized the problem the Luftwaffe faced. For years, German pilots had been told their aircraft were the best in the world. In 1940, 1941, 1942, that was mostly true. But by 1944, the Americans had caught up, and in some cases they had pulled ahead. The Mustang was the proof. German pilots, who had spent 3 years controlling the air war, suddenly found themselves reacting to American initiative. American pilots called it energy fighting. The Mustang had so much power and such good acceleration that it could dictate the terms of combat. If a Mustang pilot wanted to fight, he could close in and force an engagement. If he wanted to disengage, he could dive away or outrun you in level flight. That psychological shift was as important as the technical performance. By August 1944, Lerche's report on Fraser's Mustang had been distributed throughout the Luftwaffe. Fighter units received copies. Training squadrons received copies. Engineering teams received copies. The report was detailed, technical, and honest. It didn't sugarcoat the Mustang's performance. It didn't claim German superiority out of propaganda necessity. It simply stated the facts. The P-51 Mustang was an excellent fighter aircraft. It had exceptional range. It had high speed at all altitudes. It had good maneuverability. It had effective armament. And most importantly, it was being produced in massive numbers. The Americans could afford to lose Mustangs and replace them within weeks. Germany could not afford to lose experienced pilots. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was running out of experienced pilots faster than the training schools could produce new ones. Young pilots with 50 hours of flight time were being thrown into combat against American pilots with 200 hours of training and 50 combat missions. The result was predictable. German pilots died. American pilots racked up kills. One of the most dramatic examples of this came in March 1945. By then, the war was almost over. Germany was being overrun from the east by Soviet forces and from the west by American and British forces. The Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former strength. Most of its experienced pilots were dead or captured. Most of its aircraft had been destroyed on the ground by strafing attacks. Fuel was so scarce that many remaining aircraft couldn't fly. In early March 1945, American intelligence officers began interrogating captured German pilots. They wanted to know what the Germans thought of American aircraft. 22 captured Luftwaffe pilots, many of them experienced aces, were interviewed. The interrogations were compiled into a classified document called the Air Intelligence Weekly Summary, dated March 23, 1945. The section titled Allied Fighters as Germans See Them contained detailed opinions from men who had fought against P-38s, P-47s, and P-51s. The results were unambiguous. The captured German pilots rated the P-51 Mustang as the best fighter in the American arsenal. They respected its speed, range, and agility. Some admitted they would only try to outrun it if they had a serious head start. Others said that only the most skilled German pilots dared to engage a Mustang in a turning fight because the Mustang's agility was difficult to counter. One experienced pilot was quoted as saying that the American .50 caliber machine guns were highly effective against fighters, especially because they offered a high volume of fire with deadly accuracy. The Luftwaffe had spent 2 years developing tactics to defeat American bombers and fighters. Those tactics had worked against the P-38 and the P-47, but they didn't work as well against the Mustang. The Mustang was too fast, too maneuverable, and had too much endurance. By the time these interrogations were conducted, the outcome of the air war was no longer in doubt. The Luftwaffe had been defeated. Allied air forces controlled the skies over Germany completely. German pilots who managed to take off faced overwhelming odds, 5-1, 10-1, sometimes 20-1, and many of those Allied fighters were Mustangs. Hans-Werner Lerche survived the war. After Germany surrendered in May 1945, he was captured by American forces. They recognized his value as a test pilot and his knowledge of German aircraft development. He was interrogated extensively about the aircraft he had flown and the reports he had written. The Americans wanted to know what Lerche thought of their aircraft, especially the P-51. Lerche told them the truth. The Mustang was one of the best aircraft he had ever flown. It had a combination of speed, range, and maneuverability that few fighters could match. It was well-engineered, well-built, and deadly in combat. The Americans took notes. After the war, Lerche returned to civilian life in Germany. He worked as an engineer and occasionally as a test pilot for German aviation companies. In 1980, he published a book titled Luftwaffe Test Pilot, Flying Captured Allied Aircraft of World War II. The book was based on his wartime logbooks and contained detailed descriptions of every aircraft he had flown. The chapter on the P-51 Mustang was one of the longest. Lerche described Fraser's aircraft in detail, talked about the test flights at Rechlin, and gave his honest assessment of its performance. He never saw the P-51 as an enemy aircraft. To Lerche, it was simply a well-designed machine. As an engineer and a pilot, he appreciated good design regardless of which country produced it. Lerche died in 1994 at approximately age 80. His book remains one of the most detailed accounts of Luftwaffe aircraft testing during World War II. Lieutenant Thomas Fraser, the pilot who force-landed that Mustang in northern France, spent the rest of the war as a prisoner in Germany. He was captured on June 6, 1944, the same day the Allies landed in Normandy. He was liberated in May 1945 by advancing American forces and returned to the United States that summer. He never knew what happened to his aircraft until years later when researchers tracked down the story through German records. Fraser learned that his P-51, the one nicknamed Jerry, had been tested by one of Germany's best pilots, had been flown by the Rosarius to multiple Luftwaffe bases, and had been used to train German pilots on how to fight against Mustangs. The aircraft designated T-9 plus HK was lost on December 10, 1944. Fraser's service record listed one aircraft lost to mechanical failure over enemy territory on June 6, 1944. It didn't mention that his aircraft became one of the most important intelligence sources the Luftwaffe had on the P-51 Mustang. The P-51 Mustang changed the air war over Europe in ways that went beyond simple performance numbers. It wasn't just fast or maneuverable or long-ranged. It was all of those things combined in one aircraft. It was produced in massive numbers. Over 15,000 Mustangs were built during the war. It was reliable enough to fly deep into enemy territory and return home. It was versatile enough to escort bombers, strafe ground targets, and dogfight with enemy fighters. And it was available at exactly the moment the Allies needed it most. The Mustang's origins made its success even more remarkable. North American Aviation designed and built the prototype in just 102 days in 1940. The British had approached the company asking them to build P-40 Warhawks under license. Instead, the president of North American Aviation, James Kindleberger, proposed building an entirely new fighter from scratch under the direction of chief designer Edgar Schmid. The British agreed. The first prototype, called the NA-73X, flew on October 26, 1940, just 149 days after the contract was signed. That development timeline was unprecedented. Most fighter aircraft took years to design, test, and bring into production. North American did it in less than 5 months. But the early Mustangs had a problem. They were powered by Allison engines that performed well at low altitude but lost power above 15,000 feet. The aircraft was fast at sea level, over 400 miles per hour in some tests. But at 20,000 feet, where most combat over Europe took place, the Allison-powered Mustang could barely reach 350 miles per hour. That made it useless as a bomber escort. The Royal Air Force used early Mustangs for low-level reconnaissance and ground attack missions. American forces sent Allison-powered Mustangs to North Africa and the China-Burma-India theater, where combat happened closer to the ground. Then, in late 1942, someone had an idea that changed everything. Ronald Harker, a test pilot at Rolls-Royce, suggested fitting a Mustang with a Merlin 61 engine. The Merlin had a two-stage supercharger that maintained power at high altitude. Rolls-Royce installed Merlin engines in 5 test Mustangs. The results were astonishing. The Merlin Mustang could reach speeds over 430 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. It could climb to 40,000 feet. It had all the range and low-drag characteristics of the original design, but now it had high-altitude performance that matched or exceeded any fighter in the world. An American military attaché in London, a man named Thomas Hitchcock, saw the test results and immediately sent a report to Washington. Hitchcock had been a fighter pilot in World War I, had been shot down and captured by the Germans, had escaped from a prisoner of war camp, and after the war had become one of America's most famous polo players. He understood both aviation and how to get things done through military bureaucracy. His report on the Merlin Mustang emphasized that this was the long-range escort fighter America needed for the bombing campaign against Germany. The Army Air Forces authorized North American to begin production of Merlin-powered Mustangs immediately. Packard Motor Company in Detroit was already producing Merlin engines under license from Rolls-Royce. North American installed Packard Merlins in Mustang airframes and created the P-51B model. Production began in mid-1943. By December of that year, the first Merlin Mustangs reached England. The 354th Fighter Group, flying P-51Bs, began escort missions over Germany in December 1943. Within weeks, it was clear the Mustang had changed everything. American bombers that had been suffering losses of 8 to 10% per mission suddenly saw losses drop to 3 to 4%. German fighters that had been attacking bomber formations with impunity suddenly faced long-range escorts that could follow them home. And Luftwaffe pilots, who had controlled German airspace for 4 years, suddenly found themselves on the defensive. The strategic impact was enormous. Before the Mustang, American daylight bombing raids were limited to targets within range of shorter-legged escort fighters. That meant targets in France, Belgium, and Western Germany, Berlin, the industrial centers in central Germany, and oil refineries in Poland were beyond reach. German factories could be relocated east, beyond the range of American escorts, and continue producing aircraft and weapons. But when the Mustang arrived, nowhere in Germany was safe. Bombers could hit targets anywhere, and Mustangs would protect them. German industrial capacity, which had been dispersed to avoid bombing, was suddenly vulnerable again. Oil refineries, aircraft factories, ball bearing plants, chemical works, transportation hubs, all were within range of American bombers protected by Mustang escorts. That's how technological superiority actually works in war. Not through propaganda claims or exaggerated performance numbers, but through engineering excellence that produces measurable results. The P-51 Mustang wasn't perfect. It had weaknesses, but its combination of speed, range, maneuverability, and reliability made it the most effective long-range fighter of World War II. Even German test pilots who flew it came to that conclusion. And when the war ended, the Mustang's record spoke for itself.